So in our last class, we were discussing the distribution of national income. So in this class, we continue from the from our last class. So it is determined by the factor prices. The prices for the reference rate for the factors of production, and the price of labor is wage, and the price of capital is rental rate. That is also called interest rate. Then uh, what is the notations of all these? So W represent nominal wage, R represent nominal interest rate or nominal rental rate, P is the price of output, W upon P is the real wage. Of course, uh, when you adjust your monetary wage with the price level, so it will become real wage. So that is why this is W upon P. Similarly, R upon P is the real rental rate or the real interest rate. The same way what we have done with W or wages, the same way we have done it with rental rate or interest rate with the price. So how factor prices are determined? Factor prices are determined by supply and demand in factor markets. And remember, supply of each factor is fixed. So here the only thing we have is the demand. So the demand will determine the entire output. So and the demand for labor, assume if the market is perfectly competitive, then all the prices are giving like wages, rental rate, and the P or the product price is given. Then the basic idea is if firm hires each unit of labor if the cost does not exceed the benefit. So, so the cost in this case is real wage and the benefit is the marginal product of labor. So the concept of marginal product of labor is the extra output the firm can produce using an additional unit of labor holding other inputs fixed. So it's a kind of I have already told you in different classes that whenever you hear the word marginal, it represents one additional unit. Marginal cost, marginal benefit, marginal utility, marginal product, and whenever we have the marginal in the word marginal word, so we also have the law of diminishing marginal utility. So the same way here we have law of diminishing marginal product. It means whenever you increase the additional unit of labor after a certain point, the output that it will receive from the labor will be declined or diminished gradually. So what is the marginal product of labor here? So marginal product of labor here is if you keep the capital fixed here, and the only thing we are changing is the labor. So L plus 1 minus L, it means adding one labor, and the previous labor previous number of labors, then adding one labor, and the difference between these two output of the or the difference between these the output of these two. So here we can see labor when labor is 0, so output is 0, so no marginal product of labor. Similarly, when labor is 1, output is 10, labor is 2, output is 19. So you just have to minus L plus 1 minus L, then L plus 2 minus L plus 1, then L plus 3 minus L plus 2, then L plus 4 minus L plus 3, and so on and so forth. Then we can make a graph of these things. So this is the production function. On the left side, on the horizontal axis we have labor, on the vertical axis we have output. So the marginal product of labor, this is downward sloping. You see, when you increase the number of labors, the productivity or the output from each labor is declined. So this is the labor at horizontal axis and output on the vertical axis. So initially output from each labor increases, then constant, and then it's a kind of at this point marginal productivity of labor has reached to its minimum level. So you see, initially MPL is higher, and the slope of production function is called marginal productivity of labor. So then this marginal productivity of labor is higher than this one, then this one is greater than this one. So as more labor is added, marginal productivity of labor is declining. So as a factor input is increased, this marginal product falls. Other thing, keeping other thing constant. Suppose if we increase the labor while holding K fixed, fewer machines per worker, then lower worker productivity. Now it's your time to work on it. Which of these production functions have diminishing margin return to labor? And then if we have uh, real wage equal to 6, so if labor equal to 3 should from hire more or less labor. Why? If labor equal to 7 should from hire more or less labor. Why? Then this is the marginal productivity of labor demand is units of labor on the horizontal axis, on the vertical axis unit of output. So the real wage basically determine the quantity of labor demand. So each firm hires labor up to the point where margin productivity of labor equal to real wage. This is real wage, not monetary wage, real wage. So the equilibrium real wage would be equal to, I just equate the labor demand with labor supply. We have already established that labor supply is fixed, if you remember our earlier slides. So this determines the equilibrium real wage of the labor, and the quantity of labor is fixed. Similarly, we have just seen that MPL equal to real wage. So similarly, margin productivity of capital must be equal to real rental rate or real interest rate. So I have already told you, just like margin productivity of labor, so also here the diminishing returns to capital also applies here. So margin productivity of capital decreases if we increase the capital. Also, the MPK curve is the firm's demand curve for renting capital. Firms maximize profits by choosing K such that margin productivity of capital must be equal to real interest rate or real rental rate. Just like the labor, we have the same. So the supply of capital is fixed here, you see here, and the demand for capital determines the interest rate or real interest rate. This one, see like the interaction of this one. So the neoclassical theory of distribution says that each factor input is paid its marginal product. So also it is also accepted by most of the economists in the world. So how income is distributed? Total labor income would be equal to real wage multiplied by the supply of the labor, or because real wage is equal to marginal productivity of labor, so we just replace the real wage with marginal productivity of labor and then multiplied by the supply of the labor, or the total capital income, so real rental rate multiplied by the fixed capital supply, or marginal productivity of capital multiplied by the supply of capital that is fixed already. So if production function has constant return to scale, then the output is already fixed. So supply of the labor is fixed and supply of the capital is fixed. So the thing which is changing, or So in this case, marginal productivity of labor and marginal productivity of capital. So this is our national income. Uh, this is our income from the labor, and this is income from the capital. So you can see this is the share of labor income in the US, and throughout history, if you see from 1960 to 2000, it is almost same point 0.7 or in between point 0.6 and point 0.8, you see, throughout the year. So as the share of um, labor share of income is constant over time, so the capital share is also constant over time, because if there is no labor share, because we have already seen in our previous slides that the labor share and capital share determines. So if the labor share is constant over time, as the capital share is also constant over time. This is the cost of Cobb-Douglas production function. Cobb-Douglas production has constant factor shares. So alpha shows the capital share of total income. Then capital income is equal to marginal productivity of capital into capital, and that is denoted here by alpha y. Similarly, labor income equal to marginal productivity of labor into labor, and that is 1 minus alpha, or somehow you can write here beta as well. So beta y. So y or the output is determined by the productivity of capital and labor, and the A represents the level of technology here. So each factor, each factor's margin product is proportional to the average product. If you just do a little bit of mathematics here, so this will we have this equation, or the marginal productivity of labor would be equal to 1 minus alpha y upon. So till now we have seen factor market supply side. We have seen the determination of output and income. Now we'll see the demand side, or the determinants of consumption, investment, and government purchases. So demand for goods and services comes from the first is the consumption. That is the consumption of the household. So the consumer demand for goods and services. Then investment, demand for investment goods, mostly from the business side, and then the government demand for goods and services. So we have already established that we are seeing the closed economy, so definitely we don't have net export here. So we have three component of aggregate demand: consumption, investment, and government purchases. So consumption is the function of income, or the function of disposable income. That is why we say disposable income is total minus total taxes. So if you see the income is increasing, then the expenditures will also increase. So that is why consumption is the function of disposable income, or the disposable income will come y minus taxes, the income that is you earn, and then you pay the taxes on that income. So it shows that if your disposable income will increase, your consumption will increase, and this is the um, case theory of marginal propensity to consume. So a one unit increase, once again, one additional unit of income has the propensity to consume, and this is between 0 to 1. This is also the slope of consumption function, and that is called MPC. Margin propensity to consume is this is the slope of consumption function, and here on the horizontal axis we have disposable income, and on the vertical axis we have consumption. So, and this is the directly proportional. So whenever your disposable income increase, your consumption will automatically be increased. Second one, investment. So investment is a function of interest rate. and it has a negative relationship. So, and this R is the real interest rate. So the nominal interest rate that is corrected for inflation. So this is called real interest rate. So investment is a function of real interest rate. So the real interest rate is called the cost of borrowing or the opportunity cost of using one's own funds to finance investment spending. So definitely if the interest rate is higher, the investment will be lower. So if the real interest rate is high, so the investment will go down because the cost of borrowing will increase. So that is why the interest rate will be so the investment will be down. Then the investment function, so it is negatively slope or inversely proportional. uh, so the investment is inversely proportional to interest rate. Then the government spending or government purchases. So we have government spending on goods and services. So it excludes transfer payments. I have already told you what is transfer payment. Transfer payment is the amount of money the government pays without getting anything in return. For example, employment insurance benefit, for example, social security, for example, pensions. So all these things the government does not take anything in return. So that's why these are called transfer payments. So if you assume the government spending total taxes are exogenous or beyond our system, so they are fixed here. Taxes are fixed and government spending are fixed. So, so the aggregate demand would be, this is consumption, that is the function of disposable income. This is disposable income. Then investment, this is a function of interest rate, and then government spending, that is fixed. So the above bar you can see these are the fixed element. Or aggregate supply, we have already established that supply is fixed here. So aggregate supply is fixed here, capital is fixed, and the labor is fixed. So the equilibrium, if you just replace these things here, so we have this one. And interestingly you can see here the only thing which is variable here or that can be changed is interest rate. So real interest rate is determining the output. So it is the real interest rate which is basically equating the demand and supply. Now we are checking the loanable funds market, the simple supply demand model for the financial system. This is a bit different from the goods and services market. This is the loanable fund market. So loanable funds market means the funds we have available to give loan to others. Or here, one asset equal to loanable funds. So demand for fund, who demands actually for funds? By basically for investment, and most of the time the businesses demand for funds, and who supply funds. So the supply funds comes from the savings, and most of the time it comes from the household. Or the price of funds is the real interest rate. So the demand of loanable funds comes from investment. Funds borrow to finance spending on plants and equipment, new offices building, etc. Consumers borrow to buy new houses. Similarly, it depends negatively on real interest rate, because if the price is higher, the same we have studied in microeconomics, if the price is higher, the demand is lower. So the same way, if the price of loanable fund is high, the cost of borrowing would be high, and therefore definitely the demand for fund would be lower. So the investment curve is also the demand curve of loanable funds. So we can see here. So the supply loanable fund comes from the saving. Most of the time it comes from the household. They save their money in banks. Then these deposits bank use for their for giving loans to firms, and they just get their share in the form of, you know, spread. So, So the government may also contribute to saving if it does not spend all the tax revenue it receives. So definitely government saving is, we have already seen government saving is equal to T minus G. Tax is their income and government purchases their expenditures. So we see private saving if we have income minus paid minus taxes minus consumption. So the leftover would be private saving, and the public saving taxes minus government expenditure, and the national saving would be equal to the sum of private saving and public saving. That is this one private saving and this one public saving. So if we just do little bit maths, so minus t plus t will be cancelled, and here would be y minus c minus g. Then budget surplus and deficit. If t is greater than g, the budget would be in surplus. So t minus g or the public savings, because definitely t is higher greater than g, so it must be a positive value. If t is lesser than g, so we have budget deficit, that is g is greater than t and public saving is negative. So in this case the government needs to borrow or take loan from domestic banks or maybe abroad. If T is G, if it means the government income is equal to the government expenditure, so this is called balanced budget. In that case, public saving would be equal to 0. Most of the time, the US government finances deficit by using treasury bond or borrowing. So this is the US federal government surplus or deficit from 1940 to 2004. Um, this is the historical budget surplus or budget deficit. This is debt, and then you can write here. So the loanable fund supply curve here. Of course, this is fixed here. Loanable supply funds and national shift does not depend on us, so the supply curve is vertical. So loanable fund market demand actually determines the equilibrium real interest rate. That is. So what is the special role of interest rates? So interest rate adjusts to equilibrate the goods market and the loanable fund market simultaneously. If loanable fund market is in equilibrium, then y minus c, y minus c minus g must be equal to I. Or if we add c plus g, so or take these two to right hand side, so it would be y equal to c plus I plus g. This is the equilibrium of goods market. Thus, equilibrium in loanable fund markets equate the equilibrium in goods market. So this is the kind of uh, equilibrium in two different markets. So interest rate actually adjusting the equilibrium or the goods market equilibrium is being adjusted by the interest rate or the financial market. So thank you so much.